For 3 years, Nicole lived like a ghost in her husband's mansion, until one night, the man who'd never looked at her stepped from the shadows and said, "You're mine." But was it love awakening, or control tightening its grip? Before the drama hits, type your location below, and when it's done, drop your score from 0 to 10. Ready? Let's jump in. Nicole Carlton had learned to live in silence. In the Carlton mansion, 5 floors of glass and marble overlooking Manhattan, she existed like an elegant ghost. Her husband, Franklin Carlton, the youngest self-made CEO in the city, treated her with the same polite detachment he reserved for his assistants. Present, but invisible. Acknowledged, but never seen. They had routines, unspoken rules that governed their hollow marriage. Nicole descended to the kitchen each morning at 6. Brewed her coffee in the French press Franklin never touched, and retreated to her study before he appeared. He arrived at 6:15, punctual as a Swiss watch, dressed in suits that cost more than most people's rent, his steel gray eyes already focused on the phone in his hand. They never spoke. They certainly never touched. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. A marriage that existed only on legal documents and in carefully staged photos for business magazines. But that morning, something shifted. Footsteps echoed down the stairs at 5:58. Nicole froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips, as Franklin appeared in the kitchen doorway. He wore charcoal gray, his tie knotted with mathematical precision, but his presence this early felt like an intrusion into her carefully constructed solitude. Nicole. Her name in his voice, controlled, measured, commanding, sent an unwelcome jolt through her chest. She set down her cup with deliberate calm. "Yes?" His gaze swept over her briefly, clinically, as if assessing an asset. "You'll need a gown for tomorrow's gala." The statement hung in the air like a command disguised as information. "I'm sorry?" She kept her voice steady, despite the confusion tightening her throat. "The charity event at the plaza. High-profile investors will attend." He adjusted his cufflinks without looking at her. "I need to project stability. A unified front." A prop, she thought bitterly. "That's all I am to him." "You've never wanted me at those events before," she said quietly. "Circumstances have changed. The board prefers a family image." His tone remained infuriatingly neutral. "You'll accompany me." "Formal attire, black tie." Nicole's fingers tightened around her cup. 3 years of being invisible, and now he wanted her visible, not because he saw her, but because his investors did. "And if I refuse?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Franklin's eyes finally met hers, and for a fleeting moment, something flickered behind that controlled facade. Surprise, perhaps. "That's not an option." She stood slowly, spine straight, chin lifted. "Of course it isn't. Nothing about this marriage has ever been my choice, has it?" Silence stretched between them, taut, unfamiliar, dangerous. "I'll attend your gala, Franklin." Her voice remained quiet but carried an edge he'd never heard before. "But not as your accessory, not anymore." She walked past him, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne, something expensive and cold, like everything else about him. That night, Nicole stood before her bedroom mirror in the soft lamplight. Her reflection stared back, composed, elegant, alone. She touched the glass, tracing the outline of her face as if relearning her own features. "Tomorrow," she whispered to her reflection, "he'll finally see me." The ballroom glittered with champagne and ambition. Nicole stepped through the entrance in sapphire silk, the gown clinging to her frame like midnight water. She'd ignored the champagne dress Franklin had sent. Tonight, she refused to be invisible. Franklin's hand tightened at her elbow. When she glanced up, something flickered behind those gray eyes. Surprise, recognition, something he quickly buried. But she'd seen it. For the first time in 3 years, he was looking at her. Nicole Hayes? The warm voice made her turn. Julian Devereaux stood there, impossibly charming in his tuxedo, his smile genuine and bright. "Julian!" Her face transformed with real joy. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Likewise." He took her hand, holding it just a moment too long. 4 years, and you're more radiant than ever." Franklin's jaw clenched. They fell into easy conversation, art restoration, old colleagues, shared memories. Nicole laughed at Julian's stories, animated in ways Franklin had never witnessed. She was alive beside this man, discussing passions Franklin didn't know she had. Something dark coiled in his chest. "I'm heading a restoration project in Paris," Julian said, eyes bright. "The Musée Delacroix. Nicole, you'd be perfect." "She's not available." Franklin's voice cut like steel. Silence crashed over them. Nicole went very still. "Excuse me? Your schedule?" "You don't decide my schedule, Franklin." She stepped away from him, chin lifted, voice quiet but lethal. "You don't decide anything for me. Not anymore." Julian retreated diplomatically, leaving them facing each other in the glittering crowd, no longer strangers, but something far more dangerous. The car ride home was suffocating. Nicole stared out the window while Franklin sat rigid, jaw locked. Neither spoke. But in that burning silence, everything had changed. He'd seen her tonight, and she'd defied him. For the first time in their marriage, they were equals. Franklin hadn't slept. At 5 a.m., he abandoned the pretense and descended to his study. But Julian Devereaux's smile haunted him. The way Nicole had laughed, unguarded and luminous, for someone else. At 6, he found himself walking toward the kitchen. Nicole stood at the counter in silk pajamas and a cardigan, pouring coffee with the same quiet grace she always had. But now he noticed the elegant line of her wrist, the way morning light caught in her dark hair. She looked up, unsurprised. "You're early. We need to talk." His voice came out rougher than intended. "About?" She sipped her coffee, maddeningly calm. "Last night. That man—" "Julian?" Her eyebrow arched. "His name is Julian. I don't care what his name is." Franklin stepped closer, control fraying. "You're not having dinner with him." Nicole set down her cup with deliberate precision. "I'm not asking your permission, Franklin. You're my wife. A fact you've ignored for 3 years. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed. "Don't suddenly play the concerned husband now. You matter to me." The words hung between them, raw and unexpected. Nicole's breath caught, but then her expression hardened. "To you?" She laughed softly, bitterly. "Really? Because for 3 years I was invisible. I was furniture in your perfect mansion, a signature on your contracts." She moved toward him, voice dropping to something dangerous. "You don't get to care now that someone else noticed me first." Franklin's jaw clenched. She was close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle he'd never noticed before. Everything about her suddenly felt vivid, essential. "Maybe," his voice lowered, almost vulnerable, "maybe I'm seeing you for the first time." The confession shifted something between them. Nicole's breath quickened. The air felt charged, heavy with 3 years of silence and denial. For a moment, Franklin thought she might close the distance. Instead, she stepped back. "Seeing me isn't enough, Franklin." Her voice wavered slightly. "Not anymore." She walked away, leaving him alone in the kitchen. This man who commanded boardrooms and bent corporations to his will, completely powerless. Franklin stared after her, realizing with devastating clarity, control meant nothing when he was losing her. Nicole's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. She began leaving the mansion in the afternoons. Art gallery openings, coffee with former colleagues, her sketchbook tucked under her arm like a reclaimed piece of herself. Franklin noticed everything. The way she hummed while choosing her clothes, the light in her eyes when she returned. The version of Nicole that was emerging felt both familiar and entirely new, a woman he'd never allowed himself to see. At a board meeting Tuesday afternoon, his CFO cleared his throat pointedly. Franklin blinked, realizing he'd been staring at his phone screen. Nicole's contact photo, taken at their wedding. She looked radiant, distant, lost. "Sir?" His assistant, Marcus, leaned in with barely concealed amusement. "You've been staring at your wife's photo for 5 minutes." Franklin straightened, jaw tight. "Let's continue." But concentration proved impossible, especially when Marcus mentioned too casually, "I saw Mrs. Carlton at Lumiere yesterday. Lunch meeting with that philanthropist, Devereaux?" Something cold and possessive seized Franklin's chest. He left the meeting early. That evening, he found Nicole in the library, sketching by lamplight. She looked peaceful, complete, without him. "You had lunch with Julian Devereaux." Not a question. She didn't look up. "I did." "Without telling me." "I don't report my schedule to you, Franklin." Her pencil continued moving across paper. "I never have." "You're my wife." Finally, she looked up, and the sadness in her eyes was devastating. "On paper," she said softly, "not in your heart." The words struck deeper than any business loss ever had. "Nicole, good night, Franklin." She stood, gathering her things with quiet dignity. "I'm tired." She walked past him, and when her bedroom door closed, softly, definitively, Franklin stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the barrier between them. For the first time in his ruthlessly efficient life, Franklin Carlton understood what it felt like to be locked out of something that mattered. Not a boardroom, not an empire, his own soul. Nicole hadn't intended to snoop. She'd only been organizing Franklin's home office, sorting through the chaos of files he'd left scattered after late-night work sessions. The folder was unremarkable, black leather, no label, wedged between quarterly reports. Until she opened it. Carlton Hayes Merger Agreement. Confidential. Executive Summary. Her hands trembled as she read. Section 7.3, Union Clause. The marriage between Franklin James Carlton and Nicole Elizabeth Hayes will secure controlling interest in Hayes International Art Trust, preventing hostile acquisition and ensuring mutual benefit to both parties. The words blurred. Her knees buckled. She wasn't a wife. She was a clause. A line item in a corporate transaction. Fragments of memory crashed over her. Her father's insistence she meet Franklin, the rushed engagement, the cold efficiency of their wedding. Not romance. Strategy. She'd been sold. The front door opened. Franklin's footsteps echoed through the foyer. Nicole stood in his office doorway, the file clutched in white-knuckled hands. When he saw her face, pale, devastated, he froze. "Nicole, you didn't marry me." Her voice shook with rage and heartbreak. "You acquired me." His expression crumbled. "Let me explain." "Explain?" She laughed, bitter and broken. 3 years, Franklin. 3 years I tried to understand why you were so cold, why you couldn't even look at me. And this is why. She threw the folder at his feet. I was never your wife. I was a business deal. That's not... Your silence says everything. Tears streamed down her face. All those nights I wondered what was wrong with me. If I wasn't enough. And the truth is, I was never supposed to be anything but a signature. Nicole, please. But she was already moving past him, grabbing her coat, her purse. Don't. Her voice cracked. Don't follow me. The door closed behind her. Franklin stood alone in the mansion, surrounded by everything he'd built. The empire, the reputation, the control, and realized it meant nothing. He'd lost her. And this time, it was entirely his fault. The mansion became a mausoleum. Franklin wandered its halls at 3 a.m., haunted by echoes, Nicole's laughter that night at the gala, her quiet defiance in the kitchen, the devastation in her eyes when she'd discovered the truth. "You acquired me." The words were a knife that twisted deeper each day. At work, everything unraveled. Contracts went unsigned. Calls went unreturned. During a crucial investor meeting, Franklin stared at the empty chair across the boardroom table, the one where Nicole should have been sitting if he'd ever truly seen her as an equal. "Mr. Carlton?" His CFO's voice cut through the fog. "The Singapore deal?" Franklin stood abruptly. "Cancel it." Silence crashed over the room. 3 days later, he called an emergency board meeting. 20 faces stared at him. Colleagues, investors, his father's old partners, men who'd built empires on ruthless calculation. "I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately." Chaos erupted. Franklin raised a hand. "I've built an empire out of control," he said quietly, steadily. "And in doing so, I destroyed the only thing worth keeping." He met their shocked gazes. "I won't make that mistake again." He spent the next 2 weeks dismantling everything, transferring controlling shares of Hayes International back to Nicole's family trust, unwinding the merger clause, erasing every trace of the transaction that had bound her to him. Meanwhile, across the city, Nicole threw herself into restoration work with Julian's foundation. She smiled at gallery openings, discussed Renaissance techniques with enthusiasm, rebuilt the career she'd abandoned. But at night, alone in her small apartment, the hurt remained raw. When the courier arrived with legal documents, Nicole's hands shook. Inside, complete ownership restoration of her family's assets, dissolution of all merger agreements, Franklin's resignation letter. No explanations. No justifications. Just one handwritten line at the bottom, "For what was never mine to take." Nicole stared at his signature, precise, controlled, final, and felt something crack open in her chest. He'd given up everything. Nicole hadn't planned to return so soon, but practical matters demanded resolution. Her books, her clothes, 3 years of a life lived in careful silence. The mansion felt different. Quieter somehow. Less like a museum, more like a tomb. She found Franklin in his study, surrounded by half-packed boxes. He wore a simple shirt and jeans, no suit, no armor. When he looked up, the exhaustion in his face startled her. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Nicole. Her name came out rough, hopeful, terrified. "I came for my things." She kept her voice steady. He stood slowly. "Of course. Take whatever you need." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Nicole gestured at the boxes. "You're leaving too?" "The house is yours. I've signed the deed over. I'll be gone by—" "You gave it all up." Not a question. An accusation, maybe, or disbelief. Franklin's jaw tightened. "It was never really mine." His voice dropped to something raw. "You were, and I treated you like property." Nicole's eyes burned. 3 years, Franklin." "I know. I tried so hard to be enough. You were always enough." He stepped closer, careful, as if approaching something precious and broken. "I was the one who wasn't. I didn't know how to love you, only how to own things." She wanted to stay angry, but standing there, seeing him stripped of everything he'd used to define himself, she saw the man beneath the CEO, flawed, lost, real. "I'm pregnant." The words fell like stones into still water. Franklin went pale. His knees buckled, and suddenly he was kneeling before her, eyes wet. "Please," he whispered. Please don't leave again. Nicole's hand moved to her stomach, protective. I need to believe you've changed, Franklin. Her voice cracked. Not just that you've lost. She walked toward the door. Nicole, prove it, she said softly without turning. Prove that you can love what you can't control. The door closed. Franklin remained on his knees, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire, and finally understood what rebuilding truly meant. 6 months later, Nicole stood in a small gallery overlooking the Hudson, discussing Renaissance restoration techniques with young artists. Her hand rested unconsciously on her growing belly. She wore confidence like a second skin now, earned, not inherited. The charity fundraiser hummed with quiet sophistication, nothing like the glittering galas of her past life. Nicole. She knew his voice before turning. Franklin stood several feet away, as if uncertain of his welcome. He looked different, softer somehow, wearing a simple charcoal sweater instead of corporate armor. Lines of exhaustion had faded from his face, replaced by something quieter. Peace, maybe. Or acceptance. Franklin. Her voice remained neutral, guarded. You look... He stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. Happy. I am. He nodded, swallowing hard. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to see you smile again. Something in Nicole's chest loosened. You're different. I'm trying to be. He gestured vaguely. Small consulting firm is pro bono work, mostly. Nothing like before. That must be quite an adjustment. It's honest work. His eyes met hers, vulnerable. I'm learning what that means. They talked, carefully at first, then easier, about art, about his work, about everything except the obvious. When he noticed her hand on her belly, his expression transformed into something achingly tender. May I? He asked softly. Nicole hesitated, then nodded. Weeks became months. Coffee meetings turned into gallery walks. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, conversation by conversation, like restoring a damaged painting, careful, patient, deliberate. One evening they walked along the beach, waves whispering against sand. Nicole's hand found his naturally. Franklin stopped, turning to face her. Moonlight caught in his eyes. You're mine, he whispered. But this time, there was no command in it, no possession, just vulnerability, hope, and a question he was afraid to ask aloud. Nicole's other hand cupped his face. And you're mine. Finally, they were equals. The chapel stood on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, its weathered wood silvered by salt and time. No chandeliers, no cameras, no investors watching with calculating eyes. Just Nicole in a simple ivory dress, Franklin in a linen suit, and the minister's quiet voice nearly lost to the wind. I do, Franklin said, and this time his voice carried everything he'd learned about surrender. I do, Nicole whispered, and this time it was a choice. When they kissed, the ocean roared its approval. The mansion had transformed. Where silence once echoed through marble halls, color now bloomed. Nicole's paintings lined the walls, bold strokes of sapphire and gold. Laughter replaced emptiness. In the sunlit studio, Nicole stood before her easel, brush moving across canvas with practiced ease. Their daughter slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. Franklin leaned against the doorway, watching. Not controlling, not calculating, just loving. Nicole glanced over her shoulder, catching his expression. You're staring. I know. He crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. I'm making up for lost time. She leaned back into his warmth. 3 years' worth? A lifetime's worth. On the canvas before them, blues swirled into freedom, abstract, untamed, beautiful. Nicole had titled it Freedom in Blue, and it hung now in their bedroom as a reminder. Love could not be owned, only chosen. "You're mine," Franklin murmured against her hair. Nicole turned in his arms, eyes bright with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth. She touched his face gently, thumb brushing his cheek. "Only because I choose to be," she said softly. Franklin smiled, truly smiled, and kissed her like a man who'd finally learned that the greatest power wasn't control. It was surrender. Their daughter stirred, cooing softly. Together they turned toward her, two people who'd been strangers in a contract, now partners in something far more precious. A family built on choice. Were you hooked on Franklin and Nicole's story? Drop your 0-10 rating below and let us know your thoughts. Hit subscribe and the bell so you won't miss what's coming next.